A Christian doctor who prays with his patients has reached a legal settlement with the NHS. Dr. Richard Scott is a GP in Kent. He received a number of complaints over the past couple of decades after he offered spiritual care to some patients. He was due to be involved in a tribunal with NHS England earlier this week. However, it was called off after an agreement was reached between both parties. I'm pleased to say that Dr. Richard Scott joins me now. First of all, Dr. Scott, thank you very much for being with us on the programme today.
Well, James, it's entirely my pleasure.
What exactly does the spiritual care you offer patients look like?
So, many years ago, I came across the World Health Organization's statement that full well-being involves mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. So when I became a GP, I might say in a Christian practice in 1998 in Margate, and having really been inspired through Alpha on telling others, week 7, Nicky Gumbel was speaking to me, it occurred to me that actually this might well benefit patients. So I started off speaking to some drug addicts. Many drug addicts end up on coastal towns, including Margate, and they came in my door. And I discovered very rapidly that they had this sort of failure of a cycle where they leave jail, get given £46 by the government, some unhelpful friend spends it with them, they then run out of money, steal badly from Tesco's, get nicked, and they're back in prison. So I thought, I wonder if the Christian angle, rather than simply giving them medication and patting them on the head, might make a difference. So I started inviting them to Alpha, and saw some addicts come and lives be transformed. And I can think of 2 guitarists in my previous church who had been in jail many times until they discovered the Christian faith. So that was an encouragement. I then moved on to alcoholics and particularly mental health patients. So what it looks like in clinic is it's very, very important as a doctor always to do what I might call is standard Western medical care. So I take a long history, talk to the patient briefly on the phone, always bringing them into clinic for a face-to-face discussion. Approach after the history whether they might need medication, number 1, whether counselling might be beneficial, number 2, and then offer a different approach. So I say to patients, look, there is another approach which I, as a Christian doctor, can offer you in line with the WHO statement, which is spiritual care along a Christian basis. In other words, would faith in God help your situation? And I would say over the years, somewhere between 8 and 9 patients out of 10 have said, yes, I'd like to know more. Not least because they're desperate. It's not they're necessarily desperate for God, but they're desperate for something new in their case. And then off we go.
Well, Dr. Scott, I understand that the whole idea of praying with patients has been a controversial area for many years. I know that many people have discussed this in the past, and I know of many Christians who work in the healthcare profession who have decided that it wouldn't be appropriate for them to pray with patients, even if they wanted to. Would you now be calling on them to rethink that stance?
Very much. Actually, I think it's not just doctors, it's also nurses, teachers, other people in the professions are very scared of their medical and other regulatory bodies. And I would say for them, number 1, actually just check out the rules, because if you read, for example, the General Medical Council's rules over the years, they have tightened, but they still allow for spiritual care. So just as a brief illustration, in 1993, the Christian Medical Fellowship actually helped the GMC set up their guidelines, which were essentially along the lines of 1 Peter 3:15. You can speak about spiritual stuff as long as it's done gently and sensitively. Then in about 2008, the guidelines were tightened. Doctors shouldn't normally speak to patients about faith unless it's directly relevant to the patient's care. Well, that's a wide permission, because for so many cases, addictions, mental health, someone dying from cancer, etc., it's very relevant. And then in 2013, it tightened again, such that doctors shouldn't speak about care unless the patient indicates a desire to do so. Now, how can they indicate a desire to do so unless it's at least offered? And the analogy I give is, say, James, you come to me with a sore left elbow, and the only thing that I know can sort out your left elbow is acupuncture. But unless you say to me, doctor, do you think acupuncture might make a difference? I can't bring it up. And that would be ridiculous. So it's the same with spiritual care. I've got this quiver in my bow, and to say to patients, look, not only is this my own opinion, but we've got thousands of scientific papers out there now, literally thousands, showing categorically that faith benefits health, the Christian faith benefits health. So it's evidence-based medicine. But unless I'm allowed to bring it up, then the patient won't benefit. That would seem daft and quite unreasonable. So I would just say to people who are doctors, etc., look, do offer to pray for patients. Let me give you an example. Last week, I had a Polish man come in, and his wife is dying from bowel cancer. Now, I've had bowel cancer myself, so I had a bit of a fellow feeling for her. And she's going through all the treatment. There's no question she's having all the treatment, but she's still doing not well. And I said, look, I presume as a Pole, you're a Catholic. Yes, I am. Would you like us to pray about this? Let's bring God in, which I'm sure he was already doing, but let's ask God for healing, because I think medically it's not going to happen otherwise. So it's so relevant to people's care, and to be discouraged rather by medical regulatory bodies would just seem wrong.
This case that we've been talking about in the news today that you've been involved in, let's be honest, it's been a long-winded process. Can I ask personally for you what this time has been like for you and your family?
Thank you. Well, actually, I've had quite a lot of history with the General Medical Council since my other big complaint, which was in 2010. So in a sense, I'm somewhat used to this. It has always had a bigger effect on my wife, and maybe to an extent my kids, than it has on me, because I know that what I do is it's within the guidelines, but not many people do it. I really hope that more will do so as a result of this judgment. But it does cause some stress. And I might say when I developed bowel cancer, which was halfway through my first General Medical Council case between 2010 and 2012, stress is a major factor for cancer. So I think it was probably involved. And I've come across other doctors who've developed cancer during GMC cases. It's not good for our health. So it's a bit stressful, but the thing is, it's well worth fighting, because we know in England and elsewhere in America, but particularly in England at the moment, there's school chaplains and others running into trouble for their faith in what's meant to be a so-called Christian country, and that doesn't seem right. And I might say it seems very strange to people from abroad, Christians from abroad, where I work in Africa and India. So it's a bit stressful.
There have been many discussions over the past few years about whether Christians are being marginalized in the UK. From your perspective, is that happening? And if you think it is, how important is it for us to stand up for religious freedom?
Sure. I think there's absolutely no doubt we are being marginalised. We're not being persecuted. We're not in northern Nigeria in danger of losing our heads, or Korea or anywhere else, but we are being marginalised. During my first case, I actually wrote a book on behalf of Christian Concern, the lawyers who support me, called Christians in the Firing Line. And I looked at 13 cases, whereas I was number 8, of people running into trouble from their faith. And it was everyone from beauty technicians to van drivers, nurses, teachers. There's a whole range of people. And the second book's about to come out soon with a whole range more people. It's really interesting that, when you look into this stuff, it's in line with the Bible. There's so much talk in the Bible of persecutions and trials. Well, it's life. And within my first book of the 13 cases, there are people who never worked again as a result of being suspended or sacked from their particular organisation, blacklisted by their professional organisations. That's not right. When I fought my case, it wasn't just for me. It was with a much bigger picture in mind. And I'm very glad that's been a good result, because I hope it'll encourage people not to be cowed by our professional organisations, which is just not right.
Well, Dr. Richard Scott, thank you very much for joining us on the programme today.
James, it's been a pleasure. Thanks.